The contemporary habit of reducing serious issues and historic figures to the dimensions of cartoon characters has led to widespread depiction of the rivalry between W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington as a clash between a black militant and an Uncle Tom. Despite very real differences between the two men, Du Bois himself refused to make any such characterization of Washington. Du Bois was among the many people around the country, black and white, North and South, who sent congratulations to Booker T. Washington on his historic 1895 speech at the Atlanta Exposition that set forth Washington's philosophy and marked his emergence as a black educator and leader. More than half a century later, even as a self-exiled communist living in Ghana, Du Bois corrected a student who spoke disparagingly of Booker T. Washington. Du Bois and Washington had overlapping goals in education and in society, but different emphases. Both recognized the very low standards of education, skills, behavior, and hygiene among most blacks at the end of the 19th century, just one generation removed from the world of the slave plantation. During this era, Du Bois not only criticized the extravagant spending habits he found among blacks in his study, the Philadelphia Negro. He spoke more generally of the great lack which faces our race in the modern world, lack of energy, which he attributed to indolence, which had now become a kind of social heredity.
What's going on, everyone? Sasuke here today. I'm kind of be wanting to talk about the whole feud with W.E. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. As some of you may know, I am a big fan of Booker T. Washington. I believe that his ideas is actually more enduring than what W.E. Du Bois was pushing, right? Because in the early 1900s, if I remember this correctly, W.E. Du Bois wanted a more aggressive stance on civil rights. He said, hey, we should be agitating, we should be openly defying segregation laws, which, you know, I like to point out, we're Democrats, right? But no one wants to understand Booker T. Washington's kind of circumstances. He founded an institution. He was focused on educating black people. In the institution, he wanted to raise the human capital, is how I would put it, or how Thomas Sowell would phrase it, into developing them and giving them skills so that way they can be valuable in a society. And over time, society will be more accepting of black people because they're valuable, right? It's easier for someone to accept you if you contribute to something. But if you don't contribute to something, you don't have any leverage. And if you don't have any leverage, technically you won't get any respect. And this is some of the parallels that I currently see in the current situation in 2023 with Black America. It seems like, as a conservative, when I come out as a conservative and all this stuff, people have a problem with conservatism when it comes from a black man. I don't understand why. When these ideas have been around since the start of the Republican Party. Booker T. Washington was a Republican. And people like to characterize him as an Uncle Tom because it hurts their narrative if you speak good about Booker T. Washington. Now, Booker T. Washington is the first black man to be invited to the White House, to be a part of the White House. He's black history. But people don't want to talk about that. Because what? It gives credit to what? The Republican Party. Because Teddy Roosevelt, if I remember correctly, was the one that invited him out. And there's a lot of personal feuds between him and W.E. Du Bois, but Booker T. Washington never really took, I can recall, ever took shot at W.E. Du Bois. But a lot of progressives, black progressives, love to take some quotes from W.E. Du Bois to attack Booker T. Washington and what he was doing. They'll call Booker T. Washington Uncle Tom, a coon, house Negro, whatever names y'all like to call. And then now, in extension, 200 years later or 100 years later, now is being used against me because I share in his belief that, hey, we should be focusing on self-development to improve our standing, and in the long term, we'll win. Right? It's a long-term strategy versus short-term gain. And W.E. Du Bois really pushed the need for political power, right? And I've been talking a little bit too much, but in this next clip, I want to show kind of some of the ideas that W.E. Du Bois pushed and how you can see parallels of it today. And disclaimer, I believe, actually, it's actually a fact that he was a socialist, I believe, or a communist, I believe. So you can see how a lot of Marxist theory are in some of his conclusions about this concept that he called double consciousness. Let's take a look.
Perhaps his most widely known idea came from his 1903 book, The Souls of Black Folk, and that idea is known as double consciousness. He describes the mechanism as a veil, stating, quote, "The Negro is a sort of seventh son, born with a veil and gifted with second sight in this American world, a world which yields him no self-consciousness, but only lets him see himself through the revelation of the other world. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One feels his own two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. In short, double consciousness captures the cognitive dissonance of being black in America. You're American, you're black, and you live in a country where there are always people and systems reminding you, in ways large and small, that those two identities are incompatible.
And this is the progressive view of America, right? And I reject that. I don't think being black and American are two separate things. I just see it as one thing, right? And to me, I'm very pro-country. I'm very patriotic. I love this country, honestly. So I see myself more as an American. And I see other Americans as my people, my community, right? I'm part of a community of Americans. Now, some people will say, "Oh, that's not true, Kenny. You're a black man in America." Okay, what does that mean? What experience do I have that makes me different from other people? And some of the points that he brought up, I can agree to that. But most of the time, I see it coming from the Democratic Party. Democratic Party will sit here and tell me that I have to act a certain way to be black, right? A lot of black liberals will tell me that I have to act a certain way. You talking white, right? You exhibiting what behavior? You're trying to be white. When how I'm trying to be white, I can only be black. No matter what I do, I can only be black. Now, and this is the double consciousness that I'm talking about, is that it seems like a lot of assumptions are being made without being rooted in any kind of reality. I think W. Du Bois was talking about something factual in his time, right? And in the generations, in every generation, this is my view, is that they're supposed to challenge the assumptions of the previous generation and say, hey, is this still applicable today? I'll argue it's not. I argue the real legacy of slavery is this idea of double consciousness being passed down to future generations of black Americans, where they still keep this version of, oh, I can't be American and black. Oh, this country's out to get me. Oh, this country will never let me forget racism. When in reality, who keeps bringing up racism? Democrats. I'm sorry. That's your platform. People, the Democrats have a political agenda, a political incentive to keep racism alive, because end of the day, that messaging is what's allowed them to keep 90% of the black vote. If other messaging work, I think the Democrats will switch messaging. But they know, hey, if I call the other guy a racist, black people, they love that stuff because it feeds into their assumptions, their preconceived notions, right? And I have this ethos that I preach right here from Seneca, that we're often more frightened than hurt. We suffer more from imagination than from reality. And my question is, what's the reality? Are you really held back because of your skin color? Or is just bad habits that were passed down from generation to generation onto us? Single motherhood rate, is that because of racism? I don't think so. Right? Us doing black men doing high rates of crime, is that racism? No, that's choices and behavior. And law, in a state with in a society with law and order, people have to be held accountable. And if these people tend to do crime, then we have to prosecute them. Simple. Right? No one wants to talk about the disproportional representation of black victims in America. How are we only 13% of the population, but we're 41% of the victims of violent crime? Right? Because it'll point to what? The big elephant in the room that a lot of so-called pro-blacks won't acknowledge is black on black crime. And this is some of the things I think W.E. Du Bois recognized in his book, The Town of the Tenth. Here's another excerpt from W.E. Du Bois.
Even if whites were to lose their racial prejudices overnight, it would make little difference in the economic position of most blacks, according to Du Bois. Although some few would be promoted, some few would get new places as a result of an end of discrimination. Nevertheless, the mass would remain as they are until the younger generation began to try harder as the race lost the omnipresent excuse for failure, prejudice. Du Bois saw many of the blacks as sunk into listless indifference or shiftlessness or reckless bravado. In short, Du Bois, like Washington, saw an enormous need for self-improvement among blacks at this juncture in history.
Yeah. But he just saw it a different way. He thinks, we need to be more politically involved. While Booker T. Washington was like, nah, we need to make sure our people has a solid foundation before we start trying to worry about politics and all this other stuff, right? But people will call that passive. Oh, he wasn't directly fighting Jim Crow segregation laws. He couldn't afford to. Lynching was a prominent thing back in the day. I don't know if a lot of people want to recognize that. And this is my problem with a lot of people who look back on history. They judge history based on today's standards, not the standards of today. They're not understanding the nuances and circumstances affecting the two individual men. W.E. Du Bois, he was in the North. Booker T. Washington was in the South. Who was at more risk of violent lynching? Booker T. Washington and his people in the South. So you can make an argument that W.E. Du Bois could afford to do political action because he wasn't scared of violent retribution. Like today, people protesting, they can say they hate America, and largely no violent assaults will happen to them. All right, but if you did that same ish in the South in the 1900s, y'all gonna get beat. Y'all Black Lives Matter out here destroying businesses and stuff. Oh, y'all wouldn't be able to do that in the South. Maybe in the North you could be able to do that. And this is the point that a lot of people were trying to make about some of the lettering that W.E. Du Bois attacked Booker T. Washington for. Oh, I don't know. I forgot what speech he attacked Booker T. Washington on. But even W.E. Du Bois' own mother told him, "Hey, you need to respect that man because he has a different circumstance than you do. He lives in the South. You live in the North, right?" And this is what a lot of progressive historians don't want to point out because at the end of the day they want to paint a narrative about Booker T. Washington, right? Because at the end of the day there's two versions of Black America, right? Black America is not a monolith. So all the people in the comment section calling me coon, calling me, oh, I'm tap dancing. No, a black man had a different view. Because at the end of the day, Booker T. Washington is walking in the same tradition as Frederick Douglass. But y'all want to keep calling black conservatives sellouts. I don't understand this weird obsession with calling us names. The only reason a black liberal will call a black conservative a sellout is because he believes that he is not authentically black. And this is from and I already show you how they usually think about things, the double consciousness. They think you can't be black and American. They think those things are two separate, distinctive ideologies, two distinctive identities. When to me, it's one. It's I'm an American who happens to be black. They don't understand that concept. So they throw names, they throw ruthless accusations, all because I don't agree with their perception of the world, instead of them showing me reality and proof of why their vision is more closer to the truth than mine. But hey, I digress. I think this is going to be a long video because now we're going to start getting into some of how Booker T. Washington, some histrionics about him. And hey, let's take a look.
Booker T. Washington saw his own primary task as the promotion of progress among the many and not the special culture of the few. He saw his work as an educator in his times as preparatory, as laying a foundation for the masses, but not to confine the whole race to the work for which Tuskegee Institute would immediately prepare its students. After speaking proudly of a Tuskegee graduate whose knowledge of chemistry had increased the acreage yield of sweet potatoes several-fold, he said, "My theory of education for the Negro would not, for example, confine him for all time to farm work, to the production of the best and most sweet potatoes, but that, if he succeeded in this line of industry, he could lay the foundations upon which his children and grandchildren could grow to higher and more important things in life. Even in the present," he said, "we need professional men and women," and he looked forward to a time when there would be more successful black lawyers, congressmen, and music teachers. As regards civil rights, although Booker T. Washington wrote in 1899, "I do not favor the Negro's giving up anything which is fundamental and which has been guaranteed to him by the Constitution of the United States," his general public posture was that he was too busy with the self-improvement of blacks to become involved in political controversies.
And that's what I want, is that Booker T. Washington was more focused on creating a culture, a tradition that incentivized good outcomes. And that's what I'm focusing on. Like Frederick Douglass said, it's better to raise strong children than to fix broken people. And this is the wicked, and this is the legacy of slavery I was trying to allude to in the beginning of the video, is this idea that you pass down a culture to your kids, and that culture incentivizes your children to do certain outcomes and do certain things, right? So if you put this idea that they can't do anything in this country, that they have a disadvantage for being born black, you're kind of mentally handicapping your children, right? And you're destroying the foundation. Now, if you put in a foundation where, hey, hard work, dedication, you can be anything in this country as long as you take the opportunity, right? You have the freedom to try, but you also have the freedom to fail. Right? Here's some knowledge. Here's what I learned. Here's some skills. Here's an advantage. And I think the black community stopped doing that. And we stopped trying to create a tradition of striving for more. Instead, what we're striving for is how we can use our race as an alibi to get cash and prizes. Blame external factors that's not in our control. Booker T. Washington was like, hey, let's focus on what's in our control. We can educate ourselves. We can give our kids an advantage that we didn't have in our generation. That was the mentality of the black community, and it got us all the way to civil rights. But from civil rights, there's been a decline in our culture. And I blame a lot of it is us being dependent on democratic policies such as welfare, which incentivized bad behavior. And it created a culture of dependence. And you see it here today. Black people are still at the economic bottom, essentially, right? Poverty rates out the wazoo because welfare incentivizes single parent households, and single parent households have a high propensity to being in poverty. And if 70% of your community is born into an environment where they're more prone to poverty, is it any surprise that black people don't have a lot of economic wealth or mobility in their communities? And this is the battle that black conservatives have been having with black liberals, that, hey, no matter how much political cash and prizes you get, the culture in the community is still incentivizing, it's still standing on a broken foundation. And there's no path forward if all we're doing, you need reparations. Okay. The stats show that most people who won their money through the lottery squander it and lose it within the next 3 years. That's what's going to happen with reparations. And did nothing because the people didn't have the skills or knowledge or abilities to actually meaningfully use the money to better their community. And that's what, as a conservative, that's what I focus on. Black people always talk about, to assume that black people are only one way is racist. But for some reason, we project that same racism on each other, right? Or internalized racism, whatever y'all want to call that phenomenon. But I just think is black liberals, black Democrats are just trying to herd the black community towards one particular path, right? And that's the Democratic Party. This is why I say black liberals are not pro-black; they're pro-Democrats, right? Because if there was pro-black, if we were having a pro-black discussion, I could make some points how W.E. Du Bois actually advocated for the very segregation and white supremacy that you guys complain about in the double ACP. Because in the 1912s, I believe W.E. Du Bois endorsed Woodrow Wilson. And everyone knows, if you know who I keep mispronouncing his name, but President Wilson was, he's arguably the most racist president in history, who happens to be a Democrat, by the way. You know me. I had to remind people because people have this narrative that everything bad that happened to this country racially is by the hands of a Republican or conservative. I reject that notion. So either you're going to call history honestly and accurately, or if you want to keep painting narratives, I could play the same game too. And this is kind of a shot back at the people who keeps calling me coon, when in all retrospect, it seems like black liberals are the most guilty of being coons, not black conservatives. But hey, that's debatable in the comment section. But W.E. Du Bois endorsed that man, Woodrow Wilson, who brought back segregation. He's the one who filmed Birth of a Nation, the racist documentary that re-energized the Ku Klux Klan all around America, not just the South, right? Your boy did that. W.E. Du Bois. But where's the articles calling him a sellout? Uncle Tom? None to be found. And you know why W.E. Du Bois did that? Because at the end of the day, Teddy Roosevelt invited Booker T. Washington to the White House. That's why W.E. Du Bois did it. Because W.E. Du Bois was the second most known black person in America at the time. And he saw himself as what they call him, a Negro Moses. He saw himself as the second coming of Negro Moses. He wanted to be the next Frederick Douglass. And he felt like, why is this uneducated former slave going to the White House when here I'm W.E. Du Bois, 2 bachelor's degrees, graduated from Harvard, the first black man to do it with his doctorate degree in Harvard University. And the Republican president at the time, Teddy Roosevelt, invites this former slave. Why didn't he invite me? Right? It's resentment. But to keep casting out, I don't know. I just don't like the narratives being cast around these 2 men. But I mean, that's the truth I just said. Like, if you want to fault Booker T. Washington as a sellout, coon, Uncle Tom, why I don't have that same energy for W.E. Du Bois, who endorsed arguably the most racist president in U.S. history, Woodrow Wilson? Was the pushback for that? I don't hear any. But hey, you know, I digress. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you agree, disagree? If you have any thoughts to add? I made this video pretty long. I didn't want to make it any longer, but thanks for watching to the end of the video. I hope you guys found this video insightful, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Peace.